Making headlines for this week of December the 11th. Crunch time. Climate talks in Paris go into overtime as pressure builds for universal deal. Delegitimizing Daesh. Russia presents evidence against Turkey. Western media ignores. And false flags distract. Rock and a hard place. U.S. Fed finds itself in difficult position and may not be able to get out. And confession of a Hollywood producer. Deathbed interview seeks to reveal truth regarding moon landing.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. From what I have been observing, and based on this I could also be wrong, but news coming from the climate talks in Paris does not exactly seem to be getting a lot of attention at this time, at least in North America, but it also appears to be the case on more than several European media channels as well. The latest reports coming out of Paris, however, suggest that the negotiations have gone into overtime as negotiators attempt to hammer out a meaningful agreement to sell to the world. When I use the word sell, this is very likely the word that applies. This is a very complicated issue in so many ways. The global cabal has managed to hijack the agenda of planetary concern and turn it into their own agenda to mask changes happening to our planet that they are unable or, more likely, unwilling to reveal to the general public, because they are changes that will ultimately lead to the removal of this global cabal and its control over humanity and this planet. They will say that certain action needs to be taken, and they will find ways to continue spending billions and billions of taxpayer money without the democratic consent of their people, while implementing practices that will only profit certain people and corporations, while offering products and services that do very little, if anything, to truly change and make the planet healthier. Keep in mind that a healthy planet would mean healthier humans, and healthier humans would mean stronger humans. Stronger humans would mean a more difficult resistance from them if they were to awaken to the lies, frauds, and crimes that have been committed against them. As long as there is a global cabal, and as long as this group has control over the banking system, the judicial system, the media, and numerous governments, they are going to do their absolute best to keep people in debt, in fear, in separation, and in poor health. A few articles this week to look at relating to the climate conference. A group called the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, or CFACT, claims to have predicted what appears to be happening right now. The climate talks, which were scheduled to wrap up on December the 11th, are going to be extended by at least one day to draft a final text that will hopefully be adopted by all nations in attendance. The article by Rucker writes that the most important divisions appear to be between China, India, and the United States. Saudi Arabia is waging a sporadic guerrilla campaign on the text, apparently succeeding in banning the word renewable from the document, with the exception of a single mention in the preamble of deploying renewables as a means of enhancing electricity in Africa. China and India are standing pat in their positions and waiting for President Obama to fold. EU nations are watching from the sidelines and wringing their hands. The elites of developing nations and carbon profiteers are salivating over the prospects of fat stacks of redistributed cash. They are urging the strongest language they can get to ensure the dollars and euros keep flowing. Obama and Secretary of State Kerry want to claim this climate pact as part of their legacy. Their main goal is now to attain an agreement with non-binding emissions reductions commitments that the President can attempt to join through executive agreement while avoiding Senate ratification. China and India's main goal is to avoid meaningful emissions and climate funding commitments. One may wisely assume that as long as the final agreement is not legally binding, then the whole charade was a waste of time and taxpayer funds, which raises the question as to what the purpose of the meeting was really about. An article by a former president of Greenpeace, Dr. Patrick Moore, appearing on the technocracy.news website offers some insights. I have some doubts personally about some of the comments shared by Moore in his article, but I did note 2 paragraphs that were of interest. He states that it is a proven fact that plants, including trees and all our food crops, are capable of growing much faster at higher levels of CO2 than present in the atmosphere today. Even at today's concentration of 400 parts per million, plants are relatively starved for nutrition. The optimum level of CO2 for plant growth is about 5 times higher, or 2,000 parts per million, yet the alarmists warn it is already too high. They must be challenged every day by every person who knows the truth in this matter. Carbon dioxide is the giver of life, and we should celebrate CO2 rather than denigrate it as is the fashion today. We are witnessing the greening of the earth as higher levels of CO2, due to human emissions from the use of fossil fuels, promote increased growth of plants around the world. This has been confirmed by scientists with C0 in Australia, in Germany, and in North America. Only half of the carbon dioxide we are emitting from the use of fossil fuels is showing up in the atmosphere. The balance is going somewhere else, and the best science says most of it is going into an increase in global plant biomass. And what could be wrong with that as forests and agricultural crops become more productive? Although there may be other parts to the article that I'm not in agreement with, these comments seem to ring with me. History, as it has been taught to people around the world, appears to be mostly rewritten to suit a nationalist agenda of the particular country. Our planet appears to have gone through numerous changes over extremely long periods of time, including periods of warming. It seems to be a natural cycle, and humans just need to adapt on a more life-honoring level, as opposed to resisting this change for the sake of profit, power, and greed. It is this resistance that appears to be harming humanity and our planet. Assuming what Moore says is correct and true, this would give ample reason for the global cabal to want to prevent global warming, or rather to prevent solutions from coming from this conference, because it would mean that the world would be getting more oxygen from the greening of plants and thus contributing to human health. As long as there is money to be made, there will be people who will sell their souls to possess it. Ben Jervey, writing for Good magazine, reported on a story involving Greenpeace as they presented their report to a delegation at Paris about how easy it is to buy off academics to get them to sell a particular message. Jervey writes, with the second week of climate talks in a relatively steady holding pattern, the most interesting news out of Paris had nothing to do with the negotiations themselves. Greenpeace used the platform of COP21 to release results of an undercover investigation that revealed just how easy it is to pay an academic to say whatever you want him to say. While posing as representatives from oil and gas companies, the Greenpeace UK investigators struck deals with academics from Princeton and Penn State to publish academic articles that promoted the positive benefits of carbon dioxide and the positive impacts of coal for the poor. One of the academics exposed, William Happer of Princeton, is actually testifying at Ted Cruz's Senate hearing on protecting climate denial this afternoon, that being December the 11th. The details from the sting are a fascinating look into how academic credibility can be bought. In Happer's case, investigators said they were part of a Middle East oil and gas company and asked to ensure that their commissioning of the report could not be traced. Happer reached out to a friendly Exxon lobbyist who suggested channeling it through Donors Trust, the shady donor anonymity organization that has been called the dark money ATM of North American conservatives. Jervey also adds that the case of Frank Clemente of Penn State University has similarly damning details. Investigators asked Clemente, a sociologist, if he could publish a paper to counter damaging research linking coal to premature deaths. Clemente said that he could be quoted in support of the report using his university job title and that it would cost $15,000 for the 8 to 10-page paper. Asked for assurance that the oil and gas funding would be kept secret, Clemente referenced past articles and even testimony in front of state legislatures and said, "In none of these cases is the sponsor identified. All my work is published as an independent scholar." Obama is seeking to cement his legacy in environmental policy before he leaves office and is interested in getting a treaty that is legally binding. The Republicans are doing everything they can do to stop that. Another Technocracy article on December the 1st notes that parts of a global climate agreement being hammered out in Paris should be legally binding, Obama said on Tuesday. His declaration was both a boost to climate negotiators seeking a tough accord and a challenge to Republican senators, many of whom don't believe that global warming is real. Whether or not to make the climate accord legally binding is a major sticking point at the 2-week talks in Paris, which aim to get all countries to agree to cut emissions that scientists say are warming the earth and increasing extreme weather such as droughts and floods. Obama has spent months prodding other countries to make ambitious carbon-cutting pledges to the agreement, which would last long beyond the end of his presidency in early 2017. Obama would have little chance of getting the Republican-run Congress to approve a fully binding new climate treaty fighting global warming, so the White House has been searching for a compromise, sparing the need for a new vote. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a Republican from Kentucky, and other Republican leaders have warned other countries not to trust any deal Obama may strike. Other Republican politicians are working to nullify Obama's emissions-cutting steps at home. The final draft of the text is expected to be ready tomorrow, December 12th, with a vote to follow. CVN will have more details likely next week. In other geopolitical news, longtime listeners will already know the pattern, but those who are fairly new to the concept of a false flag may not grasp that this is an event that has been intentionally orchestrated for the purposes of fulfilling an agenda. And in the vast majority of cases, it is always a negative agenda based on fear-mongering and control. The alleged attacks in San Bernardino occurred even though there were drills taking place in the area simulating the very situation that was reported in the media. All of the following also had emergency drills taking place on the same day these events occurred. September the 11th, the London bombings on July 7th, the Madrid bombings, Oklahoma City bombings, the Oslo, Norway shootings, the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, which, by the way, officials have apparently now admitted that no attack really occurred and no one died, as well as the Colorado theater shooting and the Boston Marathon bombing. An article appearing on the geopolitics.co website on December 4th reported on the alleged events that took place in San Bernardino, California, the site of yet another false flag shooting. I will not be covering this event in any more detail. The article reported the event as a false flag and added that definitely the San Bernardino mass shooting is aimed at silencing the conversation regarding Turkey's and NATO's culpability in the rise of the Islamic State terrorist and oil smuggling operations. At the Defense Ministry briefing in Moscow on December the 2nd, Deputy Defense Minister Anatoly Antonov presented Russian intelligence materials, including photographs, satellite imagery, and detailed maps outlining exactly how industrial quantities of oil from Daesh-controlled territories in Syria and Iraq as they find their way into Turkey and then on to third countries. Undoubtedly, the most sensational moment in the briefing was Antonov's statement that Turkey's top political leadership, including President Erdogan and his family, are directly involved in the trade of dirty oil. Despite independent analysts saying that the briefing's disclosures were an important first step, which will hopefully be followed up with the release of further evidence and an investigation by the UN Security Council, much of the Western media, unfortunately, seems to want to see the fruits of the Russian investigation die on the vine. In what may be seen as a subtle and quiet realignment of allies, the article added that in an interesting contrast to their American and British colleagues, major French and German media outlets seemed less eager to line up behind their Turkish allies. France 24 and Germany's Bild reported on the Russian briefing skeptically but fairly, saying more evidence was needed. For its part, Deutsche Welle went so far as to suggest in its German-language piece that while additional evidence in Russia's accusation toward the Turkish president is still pending, one thing is certain. ISIL oil is reaching Turkish territory. The evidence against Turkish President Erdogan and his family seems to have been covered up for some time. An article on the International Business Times website from March of 2014 reported on a leaked transcript between Erdogan and his son, which proves their involvement in corruption. What is interesting to note is an article that appeared on the Sputnik News website on November the 30th. Despite what the Western mainstream media is reporting, Sputnik noted the following. Meeting on the sidelines of the Paris climate talks, Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Barack Obama discussed Syria and the need for a new Syrian constitution and elections. We talked about Syria, first of all, Putin told journalists following a meeting during the Paris climate talks. We talked about how, in the near future, the focus of our attentions should be on a list of organizations we believe to be terroristic and a list of organizations that represent the healthy opposition. We talked about the tactics of our joint action on this political track, and overall, in my opinion, there is an understanding about where to go from here. So, according to Putin, both he and Obama have an understanding of where to go from here. Could this be another hint that somehow Obama and Putin are working together on some level to help bring down the threats from the global cabal on numerous different levels? On November the 30th, in a Common Dreams article by Nadia Prupus, she writes that the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq fueled the creation of the Islamic State today and must serve as a warning against similar rash military intervention in Syria, a former U.S. intelligence chief said in an interview with German media on November 29th. When 9/11 occurred, all the emotions took over, and our response was, where did those bastards come from? Let's go kill them, let's go get them. Instead of asking why they attacked us, we asked where they came from. Former U.S. Special Forces Chief Mike Flynn, who also served as director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, told Der Spiegel. Then we strategically marched in the wrong direction. A power-hungry entity often derives a sense of power from the name that the group chooses to embrace. Over the years, terrorist groups, mostly funded and supported by the U.S., Israel, along with other Western support, have risen up, been exposed, and then rebranded as something else. ISIS was rebranded as ISIL, perhaps to take the public perception away from the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, which uses the same acronym. ISIL was then shortened to Islamic State. There is a problem with this, however, and it was commented on by a member of the Scottish National Party, Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh. In an article appearing on the commonspace.scot website, she emphasizes the importance of undermining the group's power by denying the group's self-declared status. She writes, "We must do all we can to undermine the legitimacy Daesh needs to maintain a steady flow of recruits to its cause, as well as to disassociate it completely from mainstream Islamic society. It's clear that the use of terminology such as Islamic State, ISIL, and ISIS gives a veneer of authority to what is fundamentally a brutal terrorist organization. This group is not in any way a recognized state, is categorically not Islamic, and has no support from our Muslim community. It's important to note that in this context that the majority of Arabic speakers in the Middle East now use Daesh to describe this group. She notes that the term Daesh to those speaking Arabic is simply a made-up word, and this would be similar to the group itself. As she writes, You can't defeat an existential threat with bombs and high-tech surveillance, which is why it's time to remove any last vestige of claimed legitimacy from Daesh by calling them for what they are. The tap is slowly being opened, and more truth continues to flow out to expose all that has been going on over a long period of time. You can be sure that in the coming weeks and months, they're going to be full of much more information, and the wise one will bet that the forthcoming news will only continue to become even more incredible than the previous news. As mentioned moments ago, there are those who believe that something else is going on, or at the very least, something is being covered up with regard to this whole issue of climate change. Pictures coming from Paris are showing known members of the global cabal, people like Microsoft's Bill Gates, sitting or standing in the crowd of those allegedly standing up for our planet. Chris Hall, writing for geopolitics.co on December 3rd, shares the following perspective. This week, 150 world leaders are kidding themselves by speaking and listening to themselves about how they can change the climate of the planet as if it is independent from the solar system climate. They have falsely equated the amount of carbon emissions to the rising global temperature of the planet, and yet their travel to Paris alone is contributing hugely to the amount of carbon emissions they sought to lessen. The continued suppression of non-fossil fuel technologies, for example, cold fusion, in favor of the more expensive solar and wind farms, is proof enough that the ongoing climate change summit is not held to solve the problem they have imagined. The release of cold fusion and other suppressed free energy technologies require a change of the economic system into one that is resource-based and anti-pyramidal in its structure in our society. It's not for lack of political will, but it has to do more of the world outside of China not being ready yet to transition from the old monopolistic enterprise into a new form of economic system where the people enjoy far more freedom than they currently have. The author seems to be calling it out directly, including a veiled reference to the HARP technology allegedly being used around the planet by adding the following. Not only is that the global warming a natural cyclical phenomenon, some G7 countries do possess the machine to alter the weather at will, and it is highly probable they are responsible for erratic weather patterns or the persistent warming on one location only. It is not in the interests of those in attendance to create a real solution. The article writes, the technologies that can solve air pollution can also solve the people's economic stagnation, but will effectively stave off the power of the corporation. The majority of CEOs attending the climate change summit in Paris don't want to do that. In financial news, depending upon the sources one chooses to follow, there may have been some rather significant events that have taken place over the last week or two in the global financial markets. Bill Holter, writing for globalresearch.ca on December the 7th, believes that a crash of some kind has already happened. He believes that the U.S. Federal Reserve is in a huge hole right now with what appears to be no way to exit. He asks the question about what happened on December 3rd in the markets and then proceeds to answer his own question. He writes the following. It's actually quite easy to understand if you see what they did was only a test. The Fed came out with piggybacked governors talking about a rate hike. Hilarious on the face of it if you just look at the U.S. economic implosion going on. But let's assume this is a reality. The Fed really wants to hike rates. They do not want to, they have to. For the sake of saving face and retaining any credibility, they absolutely must raise interest rates after 7 years. Holter believes there will be problems if the Fed raises or chooses not to raise the rate. He notes that just a 0.25% rate rise in rates will require the equivalent of up to $800 billion of collateral necessitated to be pulled. A huge number, and enough to tank the whole system, unless someone is willing to replace it. He continues, for starters, you must understand that if the Fed does tighten and collateral is withdrawn from the system, because everything is now so leveraged, collateral from somewhere else must be added. That somewhere was supposed to be Europe. Mario Draghi tried to push the EU Governing Council into further QE. In essence, the German hawks refused and instead want to let some air out of the current bubbles. Europe was supposed to carry the baton of QE, but instead they dropped it. What happened on Thursday was a test of wills between the Fed and the Bundesbank, and the Fed clearly lost. Holter sees the following possible scenario. If they decide to hike rates and the EU does not pick up the collateral slack, I believe we will not see the markets stay open for more than a week or so. I say this because, in essence, the Fed will be issuing a margin call into a system already lacking for liquidity. As I've said before, they originally treated a solvency problem with more liquidity, and it has now morphed into a far bigger solvency problem. Only this time, as liquidity is also lacking, they do not have the tools, meaning the collateral, to create the needed additional liquidity. On the other hand, if they do not hike the rates, their credibility is toast. On the other hand, if they do raise rates, they will smoke the financial markets faster than you can call your broker with a sell order. I can only think the Fed somehow believed they had a deal with the ECB. Even the BIS has warned the Fed about raising rates. Is the Fed just not listening to the rest of the world? Whether they see it or not, they have created a currency crisis with the dollar being the central character. Holter acknowledges that the U.S. now has a huge problem on the credibility front, thanks to both economics and also to Russia and Putin, who have been revealing information to the world also. Holter believes more false flag events will be forthcoming to divert attention away from this financial crisis. David Graeber, writing for the London Guardian, and this was back in March of 2014, called it out. He wrote in his article back then that in the 1930s, Henry Ford is supposed to have remarked that it was a good thing that most Americans didn't know how the banking system really worked, because if they did, there'd be a revolution before tomorrow morning. At that time, the Bank of England had released a paper entitled Money Creation in the Modern Economy. According to the article, the paper stated outright that most common assumptions of how banking works are simply wrong, and that the kind of populist, heterodox positions more ordinarily associated with groups such as Occupy Wall Street are correct. In doing so, they have effectively thrown the entire theoretical basis for austerity out the window. In theory, a bank should be receiving deposits, and then the loans that are made would be based on those assets being held by the bank. This would imply, therefore, some kind of risk being taken by the bank in the event of a default by someone who could not pay. This does not happen, however, because banks simply create money out of thin air. A bank risks nothing by giving a loan, and this is what makes the vast majority of mortgages held by homeowners fraudulent. The bank asks you to risk your home, but the bank is risking nothing, and in fact, they are hoping that you will default so they can make a fraudulent claim and gain another asset of significant value. Graeber continues, everything we know is not just wrong, it's backwards. When banks make loans, they create money. This is because money is really just an IOU. The role of the central bank is to preside over a legal order that effectively grants banks the exclusive right to create IOUs of a certain kind, ones that the government will recognize as legal tender by its willingness to accept them in payment of taxes. There's really no limit on how much banks could create, provided they can find someone willing to borrow it. They will never get caught short for the simple reason that borrowers do not, generally speaking, take the cash and put it under their mattresses. Ultimately, any money a bank loans out will just end up back in some bank again. So for the banking system as a whole, every loan just becomes another deposit. What's more, insofar as banks do need to acquire funds from the central bank, they can borrow as much as they like. All the latter really does is set the rate of interest, the cost of money, but not the quantity. The story of the fractional reserve system of banking is known through movies like Zeitgeist Addendum. A three-part series of articles by Jeff Nielsen between November 23rd and December the 1st investigates the nature of this banking system. The title of the series of articles is Fractional Reserve Banking is Pure Fraud. His opening paragraph states it clearly enough. This is a commentary that should never have needed to be written. What is euphemistically called fractional reserve banking is obvious fraud and obvious crime. By its very definition, it transforms the banking sector of an economy into a leveraged Ponzi scheme. As with all Ponzi schemes, there is no possible happy ending here. Fractional reserve banking evolved from the opportunity for all bankers to perpetrate fraud. Down through the centuries, under normal circumstances, it has always been observed that only a tiny percentage of depositors will claim their actual wealth at any one time. Thus, the temptation is for bankers to lend more funds than they actually possess. They are lending what does not even exist. This is fractional reserve banking, the ultimate euphemism of banking and fraud. It automatically transforms our monetary system into an institutionalized Ponzi scheme. By definition, all fractional reserve banking systems would automatically collapse if all depositors simply claim a tiny portion of their deposits at any one time. It gets worse. The article adds that the banks are legally allowed to commit the crime of conversion, or lending what they do not own. The banks are legally allowed to commit fraud by lending what does not even exist. But if depositors seek to take possession of their own property, they are treated like criminals. The bankers are granted absolute legal protection to perpetrate their fraud and their crimes at the direct expense of the law-abiding citizens of that society. In its original form, fractional reserve fraud was already entirely criminalized and entirely fraudulent. Why would our governments have ever turned our entire financial system into such institutionalized fraud? They were convinced to do so on the basis of the promise of the bankers. The bankers promised that they would respect the enormous legal privilege that they had been granted by acting in a responsible manner and doing nothing to jeopardize this institutionalized Ponzi scheme. In reality, the banks have done precisely the opposite. First, the big bank crime syndicate had their servants in our puppet governments tear up the legal distinction between banking, meaning institutionalized fraud, and investing, meaning institutionalized gambling. Overnight, our banks were transformed into bank casinos. For new listeners who have perhaps wondered why I sometimes use the term global banking cabal when I refer to certain factions of the overall global cabal, this is the group to whom I am referring, those who control the money part of the whole sordid picture. So why are governments not acting to stop this? Nielsen continues. Instead of our governments punishing these big banks for their extreme reckless fraud, they rewarded them. Using our money, these traitor governments indemnified the big banks for every cent of their reckless, fraudulent gambling. Then they did something much, much worse. Our traitor governments bowed to the will of their banker overlords and dubbed these institutions of fraud as being too big to fail. Translation: instead of preventing these institutions of financial crime from continuing their reckless gambling, they promised to pay off all of the banksters' gambling debts forever. What happens when you tell any compulsive gambler that you will make good on all of their gambling losses? The gambler runs wild. Observe what the banking crime syndicate calls the derivatives market. It is a private, rigged casino where the total amount of ultra-leveraged betting is 20 times as large as the entire global economy. To go with the institutionalized crime and the institutionalized fraud of fractional reserve banking, our traitor governments then added institutionalized extortion, allowing the big bank crime syndicate to blackmail our governments in perpetuity with the threat, bail out all our bad debts or else. Next week, we'll take a look at part 2 of Nielsen's articles exploring how a system that was already criminal, fraudulent, corrupt, and unstable, and turned into something even worse. In general news, as with almost every other aspect of our global society, truth continues to spill out with regard to the journalism profession. It was over a year ago, in October of 2014, when CVN first aired the story of German journalist Udo Ulfkott, who exposed that European media were writing pro-US stories under pressure from the CIA. He admitted to his own involvement in those activities. This particular story is making the rounds again on the internet, and it ties into other media stories that have been surfacing over the last little while. Back in August, CVN aired the audio of CBS journalist Cheryl Atkinson from a speech she gave to a TEDx conference in Nevada earlier this year. Atkinson shared how the mainstream media has been brainwashing the masses. For some people, it may be difficult to comprehend exactly how the mainstream media is capable of doing the things that they are doing. In order to begin understanding this, it requires the knowledge that over the last few decades, media outlets have been bought out or closed down as the wealthier media and corporate owners sought to gain control of the media in order to consolidate the messages that were being broadcast to the masses. As this was going on, the outlets began to send the same message out to the people, regardless of which outlet they were watching. This happens not only in media, but also in politics. Longtime listeners may recall CVN airing the exact same speech, word for word, given by former Australian Prime Minister John Howard and former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, addressing their respective parliaments in 2003 regarding the invasion of Iraq. Either it was an extreme case of plagiarism committed by one leader, or it was a clear example that someone on an international level was submitting the appropriate text to the leaders in order to send a consolidated message to the people of the countries involved. Since that time, numerous other examples have begun to appear on YouTube by committed people who have taken the time to research stories that have been aired on local news programs across the U.S. Late-night talk show host Conan O'Brien has also shared numerous examples of consolidated media messages. O'Brien himself was a target of such a message when he announced that his show was going to host the first televised gay marriage ceremony. Numerous stations repeated the story with the words, "Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope in late-night television." In the show summary for this story will be links to several examples of this, but here's a short sample of one other such example of media sharing and using the exact same text for the purposes of sending out the same message, a segment that also appeared as part of O'Brien's show.
Who are you really shopping for this holiday season? It's okay, you can admit it, if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
Well, it's okay, you can admit it if you have bought an item or 2 or maybe 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it. You've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it, Todd. If you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or maybe 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought 1 or 2 or maybe 3 or 4, maybe even 10 items for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it, if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or maybe 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought maybe an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
Is it okay? You can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 3 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for you.
It's okay, you can admit it.
If you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 say for yourself.
It's okay, admit it, if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay. You can admit it if you bought yourself 1 or 2 or 10 things for yourself, because a lot of people do it.
What are the odds that over 20 different media outlets would use the exact same item or 2 or 10? The mainstream media has been failing more and more in its desire to keep the public believing that they are honorable institutions truly serving the interests of the general public. As more people continue to turn off their radios and television news programs, and ideally all forms of programming that are distracting and brainwashing the public, the sooner these corporations will go bankrupt, or they will close down whatever parts of their operation that are no longer profitable. And this would represent a huge win for the people and for the planet. Over to science and tech-related news now. For many who have had an interest in anything futuristic, they most likely will have observed that so many buildings of the future are round. This may have caused some people to ask why the vast majority of buildings constructed over the last 100 years or so have had squared-off corners. In August of 2012, Rachel Ross, writing for Inhabitat.com, noted that the oldest forms of indigenous shelter were often round in shape. Why did our ancestors choose to build round? Because the ovoid shape, eggs, earth, tree trunks, and stones is what they saw reflected in the surrounding natural environment, and, as usual, Mother Nature knows best. There are numerous advantages to circular designed buildings. According to Ross, wind and tsunami waves move naturally around a round building, rather than getting caught at, and potentially ripping off, corners. A rounded roof avoids air planing, a situation where a strong wind lifts the roof structure up and off of the building. The natural thermal dynamics of open-at-the-top architecture round space uses no external energy to circulate temperature. It works like this. Heated air naturally rises till it reaches the insulated ceiling. It moves up the domed ceiling till it reaches the center skylight, which is cooler. And the air reacts by dropping to the floor, where it moves across to the walls and rises again till it meets the skylight and drops again. This action constantly circulates the air and temperatures in the home. Round buildings use less wall, floor, and roof materials to enclose the same square footage as a rectangular structure. 15 to 20% less material is used to create the same square foot building compared to a rectangular design. This means the possibility for a smaller eco-footprint and more living space for less cost. It also means less surface area in contact with adverse weather conditions, which improves the overall durability and energy efficiency of the home. The acoustics of round space can be out of this world. The curve softens the sounds inside the building, making it the perfect place for rest and reflection, or for socializing and listening to and playing music. The shape also prevents noise from penetrating in from the outside. Sound waves dissipate as they wrap around the building, shielding the interior from loud outside noise. There are numerous other benefits also, and this begins to raise the question as to why buildings were even squared off in the first place. One of the bigger reasons would likely be connected to the fact that squared-off buildings are broken energetically, and thus it minimizes the ability of homeowners to benefit from the natural flow of energies that round homes provide. An article in the London Guardian on November 19th by Steve Rose notes that the future of architecture is round and even donut-shaped. The new campus for Apple computers, and the government communications headquarters of the UK, the British version of the CIA, for example, are now using circular architecture. He writes that the circle is emerging as a key modern form for office buildings and a way of organizing people. This second article, however, is about an artist featuring his circular sculptures, which are based on actual circular buildings that are being featured at a show in London. The article writes that each model has been tipped on its side to accentuate the fact that they are all circular. This is more than just a coincidence. The models are by Simon Denny, a New Zealand artist who tackles the culture, impact, and jargon of new technology. Denny seems to be researching a growing trend not only in architecture, but to the corporate model that is influenced by the circular architecture. The article writes that now Denny is scrutinizing how similar hacking culture is to contemporary radical management practices. Chief among them is holacracy, a public idea that's also a privately owned concept, which is about right for this strange new world. For those not up on their radical management slang, holacracy is a complete system for self-organization that replaces traditional hierarchies with a supposedly more efficient system of autonomous teams of employees called circles. More like a city and less like a top-down bureaucratic organization, is how Zappos chief Tony Hsieh put it earlier this year. Zappos, now owned by Amazon, is the biggest company so far to adopt holacracy. It abolished all job titles and managers in late 2014, just as it moved into its new headquarters, formerly Las Vegas City Hall. Zappos is the epitome of the trendy tech startup made good. Its motto is deliver wow through service. It talks of its workforce in terms of community and family, and its circular campus is like a management diagram writ large. The article notes how Apple and, perhaps oddly enough, the GCHQ in the UK is flirting with the idea of holacracy. In the future, more buildings will appear circular in design, and even communities will be constructed in a circular design to improve the communities on multiple levels. There is a saying that loosely goes as follows: those who choose to say that something is impossible should just get out of the way of those who are making it possible. An article appearing on the finance.yahoo.com news website on December 3rd by Kelly Hodgkins reports the following. Everyone said it was impossible, but that didn't stop Colorado State University chemist Eugene Chen, who recently was awarded the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award. Chen did the impossible by creating a polymer material from a monomer that was thought to be non-polymerizable by most scientists. Not only did he overturn a long-held scientific belief, Chen's discovery also may revolutionize the field of bioplastics. Chen worked with gamma-butyrolactone, also known as GBL, a colorless liquid often used in cleaning, removing superglue, and more. Until now, scientists had believed it impossible to take this monomer and get it to become a polymer. For those who are not scientific, a monomer is defined as being a single molecule that may bind chemically to other molecules to form a polymer. A polymer is defined as being a large molecule or macromolecule composed of many repeated subunits. What makes this discovery significant is that it has the potential to eliminate the use of non-biodegradable plastics in the future. The chemists figured out how to turn the polymer into different shapes. The article writes the following. The material they called poly-GBL was very similar to P4HB, a polymer derived from bacteria that is used as a biodegradable form of plastic. Because it is more abundantly available and cheaper to produce, however, poly-GBL could potentially replace P4HB in the growing market for bioplastics. What is even more significant is not that they were able to create the new material, but they were also able to create the process in reverse, which will help break down the new material from a polymer back to a monomer so that it can be recycled. Hodgkins also adds that poly-GBL has another property that makes it even more useful as an environmentally friendly source of plastic. The researchers developed a reverse thermal reaction that caused the polymer to revert to its original monomer form. Unlike current bioplastics, such as PLA, that are only partially biodegradable, this reverse reaction makes poly-GBL completely recyclable. Bioplastic objects made from the poly-GBL material can be recovered from the waste stream and recycled using a thermal reaction that converts the plastic polymer back to its monomer form. Once recovered, the GBL monomer is ready again for use in future plastic products. This breakthrough could open the door for the production of a bioplastic material that is not only petroleum-free, but that can also be recycled easily under heat. Chen was quoted as saying that this work creates a class of truly sustainable biopolymers, as they are both biorenewable and recyclable, based on a bio-derived monomer previously declared non-polymerizable. Finally, in health news, as people continue to move beyond the need for traditional Western medical treatments for certain conditions, these same people are beginning to explore the more Eastern philosophies and also healing wisdom that comes from numerous indigenous tribes worldwide. An article appearing on the healthycures.org website on December 3rd shares 12 natural antibiotics that were commonly used by our ancestors instead of pharmaceutical pills. According to the article, long before there were pharmaceutical antibiotics, which were developed in the 1940s, there were foods and herbs that helped guard against infection and disease on a daily basis. Many of these natural defenders are still in use today with holistic healers around the globe. The following 12 natural antibiotics are offered as follows. Numbers 1 and 2 are oregano and oil of oregano. An oil that is found in oregano, carvacrol, has been found to fight the bacteria that can lead to infections. The oil of oregano has been found to treat digestive infections and even one particular yeast infection. Number 3, raw organic apple cider vinegar. Number 4, honey. Civilizations all over the world continue to consider honey one of the best natural antibiotics, antimicrobials, anti-inflammatories, and antiseptics known to man after thousands of years. An enzyme found in honey releases hydrogen peroxide. This process helps your body fight infection and prevents the growth of bacteria. A great boost to the immune system. Consider combining honey with cinnamon to strengthen your white blood cells. Raw, organic honey is the best option since most pasteurization methods kills the antioxidant effects. Number 5, turmeric. Number 6, garlic. Number 7, grapefruit seed extract. The Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine published a study that found grapefruit seed extract, also known as GSE, to be effective against more than 800 forms of viruses and bacteria, more than 100 strains of fungus, and many parasites. High in many oxidants, GSE boosts immunity, alkalizes the body naturally, and aids in digestion by improving your beneficial gut flora. Number 8, echinacea. Number 9, cabbage. Number 10, extra virgin coconut oil. Has naturally occurring antifungal and antimicrobial properties and is packed with antioxidants you can't find anywhere else in nature. Use it to boost your immune system, balance thyroid, cholesterol, and blood sugar levels, and even improve brain function. Safe to use internally and externally, coconut oil is one of the most versatile and unique gifts from Mother Nature. Number 11, fermented food. Unpasteurized cabbage, homemade pickles, kefir, and probiotic yogurts. All of these renew our intestinal flora, protects us from cancer, and keeps our body fit to fight off infections. Number 12, colloidal silver. A natural antibiotic, colloidal silver is a mixture of silver particles suspended in fluid that have been used for centuries. This treatment is temporary since too much silver, a heavy metal, can be toxic. However, it disables the enzyme that single-cell bacteria require to multiply. Deprived of their oxygen supply, the bacteria and viruses are destroyed without damage to you. In a separate but related article, another substance that plays an integral role in healing is iodine. An article by Dr. Gabriela Segura, appearing December 3rd on the SOT.net news website, shares the following. Iodine is an essential micronutrient. This means every single cell of every single person needs it. Evolutionary biologists reckon that seafood consumption, and thus iodine absorption, played an important role in human brain development and evolution. Iodine also has excellent antibacterial, anti-cancer, anti-parasitic, antifungal, and antiviral properties. Unfortunately, iodine deficiency in the general population is of pandemic proportions in our modern world due to iodine's displacement in our bodies by environmental toxins such as bromide, pesticides, and food additives. Modern farming techniques have also led to deficiencies of iodine and other minerals in the soil. Thus, crops grown in iodine-deficient soil are deficient in iodine. Another doctor referenced in the article, Dr. Broenstein, has noted that iodine deficiency has been identified as a significant public health problem in 129 countries, and up to 72% of the world's population is affected by an iodine deficiency disorder. The article lists over 65 conditions that can result from iodine deficiency within the body, and for the health-conscious listener who is experiencing various conditions without knowing why, perhaps this article will be able to guide some of you towards finding a holistic answer to aid you in helping to restore at least some of your health at this time. The link will be in the show summary. One aspect of healing that even to this day may only be slightly acknowledged, if not embraced, by most within the medical profession, is the concept that everything is energy, and that this energy can be worked on and manipulated without physical contact or even being present in the same physical location. Jeremy Halpin, based in Stockholm, has been practicing Eastern medicine since his early 20s. He has been in practice for 27 years as a Zen Shiatsu therapist, acupuncturist, healer, and teacher. In part 1 of this two-part series, Halpin begins to introduce the concept of non-physical touch and non-locality of energy as it relates to the healing of a physical body.
Many years ago, I was treating a client sent to me by a colleague who had been treating him for chronic joint and back injuries. Chronic adjustments and bodywork had been of temporary help, but the pain and limited mobility returned, so he was referred to me to see if I could provide another angle on the problem. I began treating him with normal shiatsu pressure techniques. Some very specific areas and points were reactive and caused his whole body to jump or move uncontrollably. A few millimeters distance either side of each point, or the slightest change in the angle of pressure, was the difference between feeling nothing or the above reactions. I remember the theory that each point is an independent energy vortex. That is, as energy is expressed through points, it travels in expanding spirals out through the body. At around half a meter away from the surface of the skin, the spirals then become quite large, about the size of a small plate. I made the decision to work at that level instead of on the body, as finding the exact point and angle was quite difficult, time-consuming, and was becoming an overly technical exercise that took me away from being present in the healing state. What happened next was quite remarkable. Every time my hands passed over an area relevant to the client's problem, I felt my hand bumping into a subtle but undeniably solid shape in the air. Even more interesting was that every time I did this, the client reacted exactly the same as when I had found the point on his body. This was a big aha moment for me at the time. With each session, more interesting patterns emerged. The client progressed from spasm reactions to forming defined postures. In time, these morphed into smooth sequences of postures, like an advanced yoga routine. His long-standing symptoms disappeared quite quickly, and he became much more flexible than before, and he was now doing these complex symmetrical yoga sequences that changed every session without having learnt yoga before. The point to be made here is that energy is demonstrably both physical and non-physical in nature, and can be worked with in different ways. Shiatsu, for instance, is often described as bodywork or massage because it appears to be working on the body like many other physical therapeutic forms. The logic model that informs it, however, has much more in common with acupuncture and healing than massage. It is a software model based upon an understanding of energy as the programming language of physical processes. It views the energy patterns that are either harmonious, resulting in a healthy body, or dissonant, resulting in disease. The meridian system it employs may then be viewed as code lines to be adjusted or reprogrammed as required by a skilled and experienced therapist, much like the functioning of a hardware computer can be improved by a skilled software engineer. The meridian system is only one representative model of energy, however, which means that we will eventually have to switch models as we extend our connection with energy beyond the physical body itself. In the same way that we can choose to work entirely within our laptop computer, using only the contents of its internal hard drive, or connect to the internet and access endless information from digital sources, we can work with the body in different ways too. Let us have a look at the most common medical models in use today. The current model employed by Western medicine is the Frankenstein model. That is, we humans are seen as a self-contained entity of structural anatomy and biochemistry. The sentient part that differentiates a living human being from a corpse is often glossed over, maybe because so much of the early years of medical training is spent more with cadavers than living specimens. It is a quite impersonal way to view human existence, and leads to equally impersonal interventions like poisonous chemicals and invasive surgery that can help and hurt in equal measure. Its central tenets are not dissimilar to the cutting, burning and poisoning of medieval medical practices. The evidence base it uses is primarily limited to the investigation of biochemistry. This is why pharmaceutical solutions feature so prominently in modern medicine. Curiously, this makes treatment methods a little too selective in its approach. It mostly ignores the physics department, who are much more comfortable with the non-physical world of energy. While methods like radiation and X-rays feature, for example, there is very little concept of a relationship between internally generated energy and those from the environment, other people, and non-local sources. Why is this so? Are these well-educated and conscientious doctors, researchers, and medical staff intentionally hostile to alternative explanations of the body and health? Not usually, at least, although one might not always say the same for some pharmaceutical corporations and the institutions from which they draw a large part of their funding, and who have vested interests in steering the medical debate away from alternative solutions and back to their expensive chemical ones. As the mafia might say, it's not personal, just business. The explanation lies in unconscious assumptions. If there is no software metaphor in their medical model, then, in terms of the human body, no software, non-physical energy will be recognized as real. No software, non-physical energy measuring technology will be created to test out the theory. The knee-jerk, that is unconscious, reaction from medicine will then of course be to completely dismiss the concept of energy as a therapeutic tool and continue with the Frankenstein model. Now, such an approach is not all bad, of course. Emergency medicines and surgery can and do save lives every day. But what if the problem is not coming from the hardware of our physical computer we see as our body in this model? There is the occasional attempt by some medical researchers, usually the neurology department, to describe the meridian system of energy lines seen in acupuncture and shiatsu as linked to physical structures like the nervous system. This is because, although not physical structures themselves, the meridians are at least accepted to be operating within the body. But what about beyond the boundaries of the body? If each energy point becomes an outward expanding spiral, then is it not logical that they will eventually merge with each other and become meaningless as separate points and meridians? will we not then need a new model to explain how energy affects the body at that point? One theory is that energy can be non-local in nature. Applied to the body and health, that implies that energy can affect our anatomy, physiology and psychology, for example, without originating from it. We accept that our hardware computers and mobile devices can access the internet, which may mean a server halfway across the world that remotely sends our device a bug fix or an update to improve its function. Neither does it take any more energy for our mobile phone to call a phone across the street or even in another country. If we allowed ourselves to be stuck in a purely physical metaphor, we would still be shouting into tin cans connected by a piece of string. In other words, where energy is concerned, we need to let go of the physical metaphors and their inherent limitations to which we have become accustomed. We do not need to abandon them completely, however. It is just a case of using the appropriate tool for the job. The job of healing, for example, often utilizes non-physical touch and does not even require the healer and client to occupy the same physical space. As with the example of the mobile phone, it requires no more effort for an experienced healer to work in a non-local, distal way than if they were in a clinic with their client on a mat or table in front of them. As it so happens, these are just the subjects and situations we will be investigating next week in part 2 of this short series on non-physical touch and the non-locality of energy work.
The links for information on all health stories will be in the show summary for those wishing to learn more. This week I would like to make a quick request to any listeners who have been fortunate enough to receive greater abundance through this past year. I'm working on a few projects that I am creating will be a step forward for Cosmic Vision News in the new year. I would prefer not to go into details just yet until things are a bit more in the finalization stages. One vital part of the success of this, however, is that I'm going to need to find an apartment in Toronto, and this means having the funds to commit to an apartment for me to live in. It would make me feel more relaxed and secure, knowing that I have at least 4 and preferably even 5 or 6 months rent ahead of time, so I know that I have a number of months to get everything relating to this project underway and will be able to honor any contract I may have to sign. My immediate goal is to raise at least $6,000 US or about 5,500 euro for a place to live. Any funding above this will be used to pay for launching the project that I hope to announce near the end of this year or early next year. If there are listeners who regularly set aside small amounts of funding to support projects by those helping to change the world, it would mean so much if you might be willing to consider sharing some of that support to assist me and this broadcast moving forward. Your consideration to this request is very much appreciated, and I am looking forward to being able to make the coming year something bigger for this news broadcast. In this week's final words, listening a few moments ago to the material shared by Jeremy Halpin, one may begin to accept that everything is energy, and that energy can be acted upon in both a physical and non-physical sense, while either being present physically or in some other remote location. This may begin to bring into context some of the more macro-energetic changes that are taking place at this time beyond our physical bodies or even our physical planet. An article by Edith Boyer-Telmer on December the 3rd, appearing on her blog site, notes the frequency, effects, and symptoms we are collectively experiencing now. She writes the following: "We, collectively, are more sensitive now, and that makes it harder sometimes to feel the borders and limits we need to put up. Many people will be triggered to experience strong emotional and physical signs, shifts in habits and pattern." She shares part of what is happening and what one may experience along the way. Our DNA is transforming to 12 strands. The elements in our physical bodies, the platonic solids, are downloading new layers of the divine blueprint for humanity on planet Earth. That takes a bit of time and may create one or the other confusion along the way. Physical troubles such as headaches, backaches, neck pains, flu symptoms, digestive problems, muscular spasms, or cramps and chest pains. One may experience waves of energy, and learning to balance these energies is part of the spiritual journey. The article writes that sudden waves of emotions, outbursts of anger or intense sadness, increased sensitivity on emotional, mental, and physical levels all can be changed and evolved in vibration by the violet fire. A link to an article offering one way to use the violet flame will appear in the show summary for the final words. The author also adds that as we reach a higher realm of spirituality and self-love, we also start loving the earth more. You might feel drawn to spend more time than usual in nature. Your ability to feel a communication with plants and trees can increase. Your sense of communion with nature can be stronger. She also advises to begin observing your dreams. She writes, vivid dreams can turn into a strong communication with your spirit guides. Your dreams may be mystical and bringing symbols or signs from indigenous lifetimes. The animal kingdom can make itself more accessible to you, or sacred geometric shapes might appear. When your channels are cleared, you will experience an increased desire for creative expression. You will receive more inspiration to draw or write, dance, sing, or compose. Spirit is speaking to you about how you might fulfill your life purpose and contribute to the completion of humanity. A message that was received by Lee Carroll via an entity named Cryon shares more about the nature of the energetic shift that is now upon us. I ask listeners to use their discernment to feel the nature of the message and to avoid judging the source of the message. Cryon shares the following. We have said now for years that physical change was coming to the planet. The prophecies have been clear in their own vague way, and they say that the consciousness of the planet itself is going to shift, and that the planet will become softer in humanism, and that unexpected things would happen. We even told you there might be a wild card coming and that you're going to get more of them. These wild cards would be unexpected or improbable things, world-changing inventions you didn't expect, actions from others you didn't expect, and even benevolence you didn't expect. Softer energy is coming to you, and that is very sweet, and many have said that that's a good prediction and a wonderful prophecy. Cryon notes our solar system as moving through an area of space it has never moved through before, and with these new energies, we are beginning to witness events and synchronicities that are moving not only our planet, but also humanity along in a new evolutionary journey. Cryon shares that as you move into this new energy, or what some have even called radiation, you should know how it works, for it's very related to your sun. Physically, it affects the magnetic field of the sun, the heliosphere, which then in turn is blasted to your own magnetic field via the solar wind. That's the physics of it. But let me give you the esoterics of it. This has been the plan all along, that if you made it as a human race past the 2012 marker, you would pass into this area of space, and the magnetics would shift, allowing human consciousness to change. So now you can see that the prophecy from the indigenous is also being fulfilled, for they told you about the changes coming after the precession of the equinoxes in December of 2012. How could they have had this prophecy about your movement into a new place around your galaxy? Think about it. These things are not new, and even the ancients told you it was coming. They may not even have known the specifics of science, but their prophecy is the same one I have. New consciousness is coming. Consciousness is related to the grids of the planet, remember, but not just the magnetic grid was involved. It also includes the crystalline grid, the human emotional remembrance, and the Gaia grids, all of them. These are all being worked on at this time in combination with the new evolutionary energy from the sun. These grids are being fed, if you want to call it that, by the nodes and the nulls. What is it all doing? What is the real bottom line of all this? The answer? These confluences of energies that are shifting and changing are all directly affecting one thing, your DNA. The DNA of the human being is ready to shift and change. You'll never see it in a microscope because it's not chemical. It's physics. The 90% of DNA that heretofore was labeled as junk is now understood by your science. Science now understands that this 90% is information, a manual, a control panel for the genes, but it is still a mystery as to what it actually contains or how it gives out the information to the genes. What is not acknowledged yet is that this is a multi-dimensional transmission. The DNA that has been dormant within humanity is in the process of being released and enabled for the benefit of those choosing to benefit from it, and also for the benefit of humanity in general and our planet. While some have called this process an activation, Cryon identifies it more as a release, as the knowledge begins to flow to the full body. We are in uncharted waters, so it might be wise to say that there is no one who can truly say how this journey is going to affect others. One can really only observe what is happening to oneself. There may, however, be similar experiences that people are sharing, even if the lesson and the meaning will be uniquely different. An article on the Body, Mind, Soul, Spirit website on December the 11th describes 7 common experiences. 1, you may suddenly feel like you have jumped off a cliff with no net, with strong feelings of no sense of place and nothing to hold on to. Number 2, no one seems to notice you, pay attention to you, or give you much, if any, regard. Number 3, it is difficult to be in crowds, and you are no longer able to participate in anything that has to do with group energy. Number 4, you feel very lonely, but have a few friends and loved ones left that you regularly connect to, and no one really thinks like you do, nor understands your view of reality. Number 5, you have simplified your life to a large degree, removed yourself from lower and denser energies, and you feel that there is nowhere left to go. Number 6, you no longer have a desire to heal others, to bring up the vibration of the planet, teach new ways of being, to read spiritual materials, or meditate, save anything or anyone, or participate in anything that has a spiritual intent. Number 7, you are so tired and weary of the old reality that you do not care about anything anymore and simply give up with disappointment, exhaustion, apathy, and what feels like depression, with a strong desire not to be here anymore. You think that nothing will ever change. You are beyond discouraged. I relate to these and even to the last 2 in particular. If you are one who is also experiencing that weariness with the old reality that you no longer care about, the article adds that you are now ready to be in the eye of the storm. You are now ready to leave the old behind. You needed to not care about what is happening elsewhere, as what is happening elsewhere no longer has anything to do with you. You had not yet realized that you had, quote-unquote, died and crossed over into a new reality. You were still hanging around in the old world and believing it was your world and about you. The outside or old world had to become so unpleasant that you would be willing to let it go. A December 10th article by Zen Gardner, appearing on the Event Chronicle website, notes that the tipping point is here, and it is all about you. Gardner writes that the awakening is erupting. Many feel lost and afraid right now, all across the spectrum of humanity. This deliberate creation of chaos is designed to do just that. However, parallel and simultaneous to their psychotic designs is a massive arousal of the human spirit, spurred on by an arising of conscious awareness and a deep sense of growing personal realization and empowerment. Most may not recognize these rising, seemingly confusing energetic changes as being the creative process at work, but it is. Awakening is, first of all, a destructive process, eliminating everything that is unreal and inhibitive of personal development and progress. These 2 dynamics work concurrently. Being awake comes with a price, and it may have been upped a bit or even a lot lately. You are being worked on. Letting go and getting the most out of challenging circumstances and conditions is vital to growth. Don't fight it, whatever you do. Gardner closes with the following. That's the primary battle at hand. We need to become who we truly are if we're to finish this out the way we should, could, can, and will. Activate and proliferate the truth and build community and bonds of love with those you're being called to be with. We all need this support and strength, and environments where we can be our authentic selves and grow into the full stature of awakened, empowered souls. Create a wonderful week until our next Moment of Now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, which is available on the website. CVN can be followed through the Facebook page, Scene page, and YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that if you want to understand any problem in America, and even around the world, one needs to focus on who profits from those problems and not who suffers from them. Until our next Moment of Now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.